Greg, you still on? Oh,
You can hear me.
okay.
All right. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on April 1st. This is Insight Policing Livestream Uncut. And we're here today with a very special guest, Greg Wims from the Victims' Rights Foundation here in the Washington, D.C. area. Today, we're going to be talking about expectations of law enforcement from the community perspective, and what it takes to build trust. And so again, my name is Dr. Megan Price. I direct the Center for Applied Insight Conflict Resolution and train Insight Policing, conflict resolution for law enforcement, a strategic skill set that helps officers use communication to get control over escalating situations. I'm joined by Andre Brooks. Want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Andre Brooks. I'm a 30-plus year law enforcement officer, detective. Still currently active, and I have partnered with
investigations, police-involved shootings, and things of that nature. I still train veteran and newly sworn-in officers as well, and I'm also a co-trainer for Insight Policing.
Great. Thanks for being here today. And Mr. Wims, tell us about yourself and a little bit about the Victims' Rights Foundation. Oops, we lost him. Oh, no.
Yes.
Well, the Victims' Rights Foundation is a long-standing organization here in the DC area. It really began around when we had the DC sniper. So that was how many, 25 years ago or 20 years ago?
Yeah. That was early, in the early 2000s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Scary to even go grocery shopping. Well, that's where he was shooting. They were shooting us. Oh my gosh, what a crazy ordeal. We can, hopefully he'll dial back in, but in the meantime, maybe Mike and Andre, you can speak to the questions of the day, which are, what has your experience been of community expectations of law enforcement, particularly your involvement with victims as homicide detectives? Kind of what are the expectations? What are communities looking for?
Well, I will start off by saying, as a homicide investigator, we dealt hand in hand with the victims' advocates, victims' rights advocates. A lot of times they would serve as the liaison between the police department and the families during the criminal, the trial proceedings and all. And, Andre, I'm sure you can mention, you can speak on this as well, but the victims advocates they would get the respect and the trust of the families more so than the police would have. So a lot of times the families wouldn't tell us as much as they would tell the advocates. So based on that, I developed strong relationships with the advocates in my, working on my cases that I was involved in, because some of the information you would actually, they would be selecting a jury on a case that we were working alongside the family, and we wouldn't have the information that the advocates would have. So I'd have their personal numbers, and we would develop relationships and exchange information that way. So what do you think, Andre? You recall working with them?
Yeah, I think they're a vital, a much needed source in the community, especially to bridge that gap between the law enforcement and the victims. I can say it's funny because they're almost a neutral party in this whole situation when you're dealing with that. A lot of people don't have a lot of trust of the police, as we know, but then you have a victim coordinator who actually takes the time to kind of become intimate in terms of the case involvement, setting up appointments for victim services for the remaining families and things like that. So, they play a vital role in the community when it comes to dealing with survivors of crimes. And, like Mike said, oftentimes, we would get information that normally we wouldn't be privy to, because, even though we were trying to solve their loved one's murder or something like that, they felt more entrusted with the victim coordinator just because they've built a rapport at the right time with them. So yeah, definitely much needed.
Hey, look like Andre froze, and then that was it. I couldn't see that.
You dropped off. So we're glad you're back, Greg.
So I dropped off because I thought it was you that dropped off.
We kept going. So Mike and Andre were just talking about how important, from their perspective, victims advocates are for helping families and victims' families through the process of, through courts, through investigations, through all those pieces, and that, they provide a liaison between communities and law enforcement. But can you tell us again a little bit? I think we broke off where you were going to tell us about Victims' Rights Foundation, and then we'll jump into the question for you.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Price, thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to have Mike and Andre with us. I am Greg Wims, the founder of the Victims' Rights Foundation, which started in Gaithersburg, Maryland, to serve the Washington, D.C. area, but we're now global. We have offices pretty much throughout the world now. And what we do is very simply work with victims of crime and relate them to police, because when there's a crime, you have to have the police department to investigate. And then of course you have to have the judiciary to litigate. So what we simply do is work with a family, and I've worked with Mike on many occasions to let them know, number one, they can trust the police department, that they have to give all the information that they can, because a lot of the victims' families are afraid. They're afraid that if they tell someone, or tell especially law enforcement, some information, it could come back on them. So we establish that trust, and then we work with them all through the process. As the two officers know, usually when you're working on a case, it's anywhere from 4 to maybe 10 months. So that communication has to be there, and that trust has to be there between us, Victims' Rights Foundation, and the law enforcement and the family. It's a three-way partnership.
Great. So, so what is it that you do? You said that, a big piece is establishing trust between the victims or the victims' families and law enforcement. What would you do, or what did you do to build that trust? What were your strategies?
Well, the first thing is, today's a little easier because we have a track record of 25 years. But when we first started, what we did, when, let's say in a case, unfortunately, of a person that was murdered, and that's the worst case that we have, we would, number one, go to the family and offer our services, which a lot of times is just support and counseling. If they ask for like spiritual guidance, we have an array of like from Buddhist to Christian to Judaism or whatever. And then after that, we say, look, let us try to catch the person that did the crime if they are running, and therefore I'll tell them we have to work with the law enforcement. We have to work with the police, because they're the only ones that can catch this person. And because we established the relationship in the beginning and they trust us, and especially now because our reputation is very good, we then can go with the law enforcement, and everyone cooperates, and we go from there. So that's how it works. The families trust us. We sort of guarantee that they can trust law enforcement. And I have to say, in 25 years, we've never had a problem at all. In the many hundreds of cases that we worked on, there's never been a problem working with law enforcement when we get involved with the family.
That's a good track record there, man.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
They trust y'all more than they trust us at times.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a really important, you provide that credibility to let the families know that they can trust and they need to trust law enforcement in order to solve the crime and to close the case. Is that right?
Yes, and I tell you one of the things too that helps, and again, I gave you the worst case because we work with also domestic violence and so forth, but we would also attend the funerals. Usually, let's say if there's 10 funerals, 8 of them, we will be there. If not myself, one of our volunteers. That means a lot to a family that we don't know the people at all. I think maybe out of all the cases we've had, we might have known a family or have known of a family just a few times. They're usually strangers, so that established the trust. But also, one of the things we do now, we have a fund because we have fundraisers every year, and we will put up some money, what we call like for crime solvers, or some people may call it something else, to try to catch the person who committed the crime. And so that family sees that we invested. We had the funeral, we're putting our money up to as a reward, and then we're with them, of course, at the trial. And all along the way, uses detectives that we work with. The detective is with us, or they're communicating back and forth with the family or families. And so that trust is there.
And you know, Megan, what I can say is that I do remember sometimes, and I think Greg and I spoke about this earlier. A lot of times, as detectives, we really don't have the time to update the family on every single aspect of the investigation. And that's where the victims advocates stepped in, and they'll help us out because they know we update them, they'll know what's going on, and they may have that relationship with the family, and they can fill them in.
He's absolutely right. I was telling him just yesterday in Washington, D.C., so it wasn't a Maryland case. The family had called. They had not heard from the detective in about a month. And so I said, let me call. They're probably looking, but sometimes you cannot give information out even to the family because you just want to make sure you can close the case. So with that, I did call the detective, and he did say, well, we're working. We have some evidence, but we want to keep it close to us right now. With the prosecutor's office also is what he said. But so just let the family know, no, we're working it. It's not, they always say we don't want it to be a cold case, the family. That's the thing I hear all the time. We don't want this to be a cold case. And so I assured them in this case that they're working it, and that when they can talk to them or even have me to relay some information, we will. But yeah, Mike, you're right. Because families, they want to hear something every week if they can, because of course it's a loved one that they're talking about.
You're saying every week. Some families wanted it every day. I mean, I can understand a month without speaking with the detective. That, I mean, I tried to go, Andre, you remember how we did it. We would do it weekly, at least four, every 4 or 5 days. You have to, even if it's something you can't tell the family, you just say, you explain that to them. Hey, look, I don't want to, I don't want to get you involved. The only people that know about this are the detectives and the person that did the crime. I don't want to dilute it at all. So you just let them know. So.
And I'm glad you said that for you and Andre, because sometimes if it's just an email saying, look, we cannot tell you what we're doing, but we want you to know we're still working the case, it means a lot. And I hope other officers will tune into your show, Dr. Price, and they can hear that. We know everyone's busy and it's so you're underfunded. We understand that with law enforcement, but just an email or a phone call, it means a lot. And it also helps in the community because they talk to other community leaders and say, yes, I've talked to the officer today. They're still working it. It's not a cold case. Because again, I hear that all the time. So if other officers are listening, do what Andre and Mike are doing. Just, I don't know, at least twice a month, if not weekly, twice a month.
It goes back to, a theme that has come up a number of times in our live streams about transparency. Even if there's nothing to report that there's nothing to report, just to keep those lines of communication open. And that really does, it sounds like, go a long way towards keeping the trust strong.
Yes.
I always say that, and I know Mike knows this, when dealing with families and loved ones, always think about how you would want to be treated if you were in that situation. And, I think, by us being invested in the community ourselves, the way we handle things were, okay, we live here, we need to be a part of this community, and we need to make sure that they understand that we're just not some guys off the street from another place that just really don't care. So I think it's a very important. And then, a lot of, I know, Greg, you noticed that have a lot of these survivors meetings and stuff that they get with the homicide survivors of crimes and their parents and things like that. And, they often talk, and trust me, those things, I've been to a few of those, and those things get pretty heated because if those officers aren't transparent, those people will let you know if, they'll call you right out by name if so-and-so has your case. And in some places, some of these detectives have multiple cases of multiple survivors, victims, families in these meetings, and they'll let you know. They'll let you know. So transparency is definitely the key. And, I can't speak enough about that.
So I have one last question for you, Greg. And I mean, you spoke at the beginning that, oftentimes survivors or families don't have trust in law enforcement at the beginning. So once they go through a process with you, as the liaison and with law enforcement, does that change? Do you see a difference in terms of that expectation around law enforcement and that baseline of trust?
I can say, again, 25 years of experience in literally thousands of cases. It does happen because once they see that the only two people, like you said, the person who committed the crime and of course the deceased in this case, they probably know what happened. So it's with us working closely with the detectives. It's usually that's what it is, detective. They see and they trust and they tell the other family members. In a lot of the cases we work with, and I would say 70%, there's somehow a religious part of someone in the family, whether it's a grandmother or the father, has an affiliation with a house of worship. Again, because we work with Muslims and others. And when that person tells that faith leader that, yes, we're doing everything, or the law enforcement is doing everything they can, and the Victims' Rights Foundation is with us, that means a lot to that community and to that family. Because a lot of times, and you see it on the news, and of course you two know as detectives, that if you don't have that trust or the goodwill between the three, I would say that's the law enforcement, the community, and the victim's family, it doesn't go well. So I feel that once we get involved and they see that law enforcement is helping, they spread the word to other family members in their congregations. And we sometimes, I didn't mention this, Megan, in the beginning, we maybe 50% of the times we will have a vigil where we will light candles, and usually someone from the faith community will come. So that's why I mentioned that. That's important to us, but it does help. And sometimes, as you two know, as the officers, we get tips from the community. It's hard, but we do get tips from time to time, and that makes a difference.
Wow. So, I mean, it's just affirms how important community partnerships are for, the goals of community safety and law enforcement in general. So it's excellent that you do what you do. We really appreciate you and appreciate you taking the time to be with us today to really open up, that part of the work. So thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks to the audience for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.